Hello and welcome to the World Discord podcast. Joel, are you there?
Who?
Joel, are you there?
Who? What?
That's Joel. Okay,
Are you
so
so ensconced in your basement?
he's Joel Ostrow, and I'm ensconced in my basement office. I'm Brian Endless, and we are
Hi,
back
Brian.
for another. Hello, Joel. We are back for another episode. We're going to take a break from Who Benefits this week because we realized we hadn't talked about Ukraine for ages. And there's a lot of stuff that's been happening in addition to not a lot of stuff that's been happening. There hasn't been a ton of movement. We're not seeing it in the news because, frankly, everything in Iran is just taking over. So there could be massive things going on in Ukraine, and we just haven't heard about it because nobody wants to cover it. But the good news is we have Joel here, who is supposedly an expert on these things, and he's going to give us an update, and then I will question him in inappropriate ways, and that'll be the episode. So, Joel, why don't you take it away?
Thanks, Brian. Yeah, they're reporting in this country on Ukraine is scant at best. This is not the case in those areas that used to be the allies of the United States of America. We're talking about Europe primarily and the other democracies. And I think I wanted to open, and if I remember at the end, we'll close. If you want reliable information on what is happening in the war, far and away the most thorough, complete, accurate site is the Institute for the Study of War.
Interesting.
There's nothing that compares to their access or their use of sources, English, Ukrainian, and Russian, and their expert analysis, both strategic, military expert, and political foreign policy expertise, really is top notch.
Now, I usually jump to the BBC just as my mainstream on that. Is that an issue, or you're just saying this one's better?
No, but when BBC reports, they're relying heavily on ISW.
Got it. Okay.
Certainly, they have their own reporters on the ground, as does the Times, as does CNN.
Right.
But most of those journalists too are using their daily briefings that come out of Institute for the Study of War.
Okay.
It can be extremely technical. They cover territorial aspects. They cover weapons aspects. They cover personnel aspects. They cover foreign policy aspects. And they have overview. Like there are a whole bunch of links that then have daily or weekly updates under them.
Okay.
So you could spend days and days just on that site and never get any other news about anything else. I have found, in terms of news reporting, Ukraine Inform, I'm pretty sure it's UKR Inform, and Euromaidan Press. Those are both Ukrainian journalists who have what have turned out to be the most reliable and accurate reporting.
Okay.
Meaning their reports end up being verified. It's not biased all, hooray, Ukraine is winning everything, that kind of.
Right.
Because there is that out there. So those are the three I go to regularly.
Okay.
I will say my regular go-to used to be Matthew Chance and CNN's reporting, and the New York Times had very good reporters.
Mm-hmm.
But since the corporate consolidation that will be featured in one of our future Who Benefits episodes, not only has the quality of reporting cratered, but the amount of reporting has virtually disappeared.
Sure.
So, okay, a quick overview, if I may.
Please.
So most of this is really since October, but that's awkward. So I'm just gonna, whenever I would say since October, I'm gonna say this year. A lot of these updates tend to go seasonally,
Right.
and because the situation from fall to winter didn't change, most of these since kind of reports go back to October now, to
Right.
include fall and winter, because really everything stayed stagnant over the winter from this. Russia has advanced less than 0.03% of Ukraine's territory, meaning since that time, their takeover of Ukrainian territory, according to their objectives, they've taken over 0.03%.
But now that's gone back and forth over that time, hasn't it? There's been some small back and forth.
But so they have their advances have primarily been in the Pokrovsk area that
Mm.
for when reporting was happening, identified Pokrovsk as a key strategic point. Russia has largely claimed the entire city, but not the region yet. That is where their advances are. Those advances have been countered by losses in what I view as more strategically important area of Dnipropetrovsk, and the river, where Ukraine has made substantial gains.
And why is that? What's the difference in terms of strategic usefulness of
Proximity
those
to
two?
that so-called land bridge that connects Russia to Ukraine,
Got it.
to Crimea. I'm
To
sorry.
Crimea. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Um, so that's an overview of the territorial situation. Not going to really go into that more because it's really the least interesting part of what's been
Sure.
going on in Ukraine.
Mhm.
Russia has experienced what can only be described as I have staggering in my notes. It's really incomprehensible personnel losses, and I'll discuss the human cost in the first section of my sort of summary of what's been going on. Uh, there have been major Ukrainian weapons advances, like nobody could have predicted this. Just astounding advances in technology. We've heard about the drone technology advances. What you don't hear is that exists on both land, air, sea, and air defense,
Uh-huh.
but also the range of their drones has improved. So we'll talk about that.
So to be clear, it's all drone technology advances. They've just massively widened what they do with drones.
Not just widen what they do, but how they do it and the capacity with which they do it.
Okay.
Um, Ukraine is basically out of air defense missiles, meaning they still have the Patriot launchers, but they do not have interceptors.
Right.
Um, so they are vulnerable now, like they were at the beginning of the war, to cruise missile attacks. And that's why you've heard about the attacks recently by Russia against Kiev and other major cities. Um, Ukraine is virtually defenseless against missile attack.
Hmm.
Um, and they have shortages of all artillery that they've relied on since the beginning of the war. So we're talking about just regular rockets, artillery shells, like you name it,
Right.
any not even advanced, any conventional weaponry. They are experiencing shortages. That's why they've had this focus on the drones. All of that, and Ukraine is hoping for a summer surge. Uh, there are multiple confirmed reports that they are on the brink of this, but they need European weapons support given the U.S. absence. Um, there is a distinct battlefield advantage to Ukraine in several areas, and a weakening of Russia's positions. Um, and yet Russia is conducting these long range strikes around Ukraine. So that's the basic overview.
Okay.
So what I've planned to talk about are the human costs of the war, the weapons situation, um, and a little bit about Russia's internal situation.
Okay. Yeah.
Before I
No,
go
sounds
on,
good.
anything you
Yeah.
wanted to?
No, I think in starting with human cost with casualties and maybe
Oh, I have to.
displacement and things like that is the thing that makes the most sense. So let's go. Let's go there.
Yeah. So let's start with Ukrainian losses. Now, most Ukrainian media um, uh, their tallies for Ukrainian losses start in 2014 with Russia's initial takeover of Crimea and parts of Donbass. Um, I'm sticking with from February of 2022 when
Very
this
confident.
war, the all-out war, began and Russia's
Right.
attempt to destroy all of Ukraine. Ukraine has suffered about 120,000 military deaths. The range is between 100,000, 140,000, and about 500,000 casualties.
Civilian casualties.
No military
Oh,
casualties.
oh, okay.
Yeah. Um, so casualties meaning, and these numbers, whenever we talk about military casualties, we're talking about um, combatants who are so wounded that they cannot return back to the battlefield.
Right. Hmm.
A lot of the Ukrainian soldiers, as we've heard throughout this war, count as casualties and nevertheless return to the battlefield,
Right.
missing limbs, people that our friend Rima patches up and who
Right.
should be going home and they go back.
Yep.
But so catastrophic casualties
Yeah.
that takes them off the battlefield, 500,000. On the civilian side, since you asked, these numbers are harder to come by. And it also is harder to count because how do we count those, particularly in the occupied areas that we just don't know how many are being tortured, killed?
Right.
So this does not include those. So this is in Ukrainian controlled Ukraine still. So we're talking about roughly 80% of the territory.
Sure.
16,000 civilian dead since the beginning of the war. That number's lower than I thought it would be,
Yeah.
although it's absurdly high, and about 45,000 wounded. How accurate these numbers are, oddly enough, the military casualties, which Ukraine does try to keep secret, are more verified and verifiable than are the civilian numbers by
Interesting.
all
How
of
do
the
they
sources I
verify if the government's keeping them secret?
because so much of the monitoring of what is happening is at the front and of the on the battlefield. So satellite and drone technology and movements
Okay.
of battalions and stuff.
Got it.
And there are other reports about deployments, that makes it possible for those who are serious investigators. And then there's also heroic Ukrainian journalism at the front,
Yeah.
military journalists and journalists, um, and so you could there are more accurate reports. Plus, it's a more definable territory that the Russian attacks are happening here, there, and everywhere, and it's
Right.
just harder to know
Yeah. And that's
when it.
the
Yeah.
journalists are even more insane in this war than
Oh God.
in most wars in the past. I mean, probably
Oh
since
God.
World
Yeah.
War One.
Yeah.
It just absolute insanity.
Yeah. I forgot to ask Rima while she was here if she's like treated any uh,
She hasn't
journalists.
talked about that when she and I have chatted either, so I'm not sure.
Like, are there embedded journalists
Yeah.
even? Probably
And
not.
for those who haven't seen the episode, friend Rima Zaritis is a American who's volunteered and is a combat medic, basically on the front lines in
Right.
Ukraine. And she's done a show with us and done a couple on the radio with Joel. Just back in the States for a little while last week, but we get a lot of information
Yeah.
from her always
From her.
after the fact, so it's not identifiable.
And recipient of the Red Cross Global
Yep.
Citizen Hero Award. Um, and it's episode 34. I still say probably the most important
I
episode
think
of
so.
ours to watch, even though you should watch all of them. And but anyway,
By the
okay.
way,
Yeah.
happy episode 50. I should have said that at the
Happy
beginning.
episode 50. Yeah, half a
It's
hundred.
amazing. Yep.
And then there is, because we're talking about the human and the human cost of the war, the kidnapped and captured Ukrainians is truly impossible to calculate. Ukraine counts all of occupied Ukraine as captured Ukrainians.
Right.
So obviously, but so are they actually kidnapped or still living in their homes? There is no way to know.
Right.
Um, there
Do
are
we,
wildly divergent reports on the number of children who
I
have
was about to
been
ask about that because that's a big one that has been reported on a number of times. Russians taking kids and basically the genocide that comes from taking kids and
correct.
trying to turn them into Russians.
And one piece of evidence that my own analysis, no one else has put it this way. Russia has dramatically stepped up the quote unquote export of Ukrainian children from the territories that it occupies, exporting them to Russia proper.
Uh,
Um, and The monthly numbers that I've read since the beginning of the year have been between 5 and 20,000.
Wow.
Again, it's but 5,000 is the low conservative number,
Right.
so we can say it's probably closer to 10. At least 250,000 Ukrainian children have been kidnapped and moved to Russia.
It's just
That
insane.
and when I say at least, the number is greater than that.
Right.
100% confident that the number is greater than that.
Yeah, this is one of those things in this conflict. We hear a lot about how drones make this conflict different. It's the first drone war. This is a war where there have been conflicts like Bosnia, like
Yeah.
Rwanda, where there have been efforts to eliminate Rwandan children, eliminate Bosnian children, usually through rape. This,
Excuse me,
though, the mass kidnapping campaign
is
is just absolutely unheard of.
unprecedented. Yeah.
Yeah,
It is clearly genocidal. And as I was saying, like I take the acceleration in recent months and the predicted continued acceleration over the summer as evidence that Russia's worried about its grip on the territories it controls.
yeah,
And so it's depopulating of Ukrainians and probably hoping to accelerate the movement of Russian citizens through various incentives it gives to those territories.
yeah.
Having more success with that in Crimea
Yeah.
because it
I'm
has
just
a
thinking, and
stronger grip.
as you say that, that's interesting because the thing it reminds me most of in terms of future is France after World War One, because it's
Yeah.
something like 70 to 80% of French males died in combat in World War One, and that had an enormous effect for decades on French society. Now
England
we're
too.
looking. Yeah, yeah. Well, it wasn't quite as high, but yes, they had a high percentage. Now we're looking at 250,000 Ukrainian kids, and they're
Yeah.
almost definitely not coming back. And that is, just destroying a young generation of Ukrainians. And it's on purpose to make it harder to be Ukrainian in the future.
That's
So,
exactly the
yeah,
purpose.
it's
Yeah.
just horrific.
Right. Let's turn to Russian losses.
Sure.
And I'm going to preface this. The Soviet Union uh, invaded Afghanistan in 1970. I don't remember the year. Do you remember the year? Was it
79.
77?
Oh, 70. I thought it was
Hmm?
79. It might have been
I thought
77.
79 too, but they were there They were there for 9 years, and I know they came back before 88. But anyway,
Whatever.
the Soviets were in Afghanistan for 9 years. Russia suffered in 9 years a cumulative total of 13,000 dead soldiers. I'm going to repeat that. The Soviet Union suffered, and it was primarily Russia almost entirely, in 9 years in Afghanistan, 13,000 dead.
And the number of dead was a not insignificant part of what ended
Oh,
up
I'll get to that.
pushing them to leave Afghanistan. Yeah.
33,000 wounded, total 33,000 wounded in 9 years. The war in Afghanistan is largely credited for bringing down the Soviet Union, certainly by most former citizens and citizens of the former Soviet Union. It was not Reagan's military buildup. They stabbed themselves in the foot and kept stabbing.
Yep.
And what happened when 13,000 died and 33,000 were wounded, so a total of 46,000, was an organization called the Committee of Mothers of Soviet Soldiers. They were mothers who had lost their sons or had them come back catastrophically wounded from Afghanistan. That movement spiraled other movements, anti-communist movements, that the Soviet Union would not have come down, communism would not have fallen in 1991 without the Committee of Mothers of Soldiers.
Hmm.
It is indisputable. They were that movement was an engine for the creation of Memorial, which was a sister movement to expose the crimes, Stalin's crimes against the Soviet people generally during the Great Terror. Memorial would not have gotten to where it was if it hadn't been for that committee of soldiers' mothers. And then other international human rights organizations would not have gained the prominence there. Afghanistan, the dead and wounded in Afghanistan is If it is not the number one cause, it is one of three co-equal causes of the fall of communism and the breakup of the Soviet Union.
Mhm.
Okay. Russia currently, every month, is experiencing 35,000 casualties in
Wow.
Ukraine. Every month, Russia is experiencing 2,000 more casualties than they did in 9 years in the war in Afghanistan that brought down communism in the Soviet Union.
Yep.
They're experiencing an equal number of deaths to those 9 years, 13,000 in 6 to 7 weeks. It's roughly 1,500 a week. Soldiers killed in
Wow.
Ukraine. 500,000 dead, 1.5 million wounded soldiers since the beginning of the war. And there is not a peep of protest inside of Russia.
Hmm.
Um,
And do we think that that
that is
is
largely why WCPT, why Joan Esposito has named me Dr. Doom and Gloom, because I don't see it ending because there's no pressure on Russia to end it.
right?
And
How is Russia keeping a lid on that? Because that's an enormous. I'm just thinking of the wounded, basically the walking wounded now being back in society and everybody getting a blatant view of what's happening.
um, if I answer that, it's simply going to be my political and partisan bias at this
Yep.
point.
Sure.
Um,
Give a biased answer. That's fine. Understood.
and I'll preface it by saying uh, I got slapped down at the beginning of the war publicly on a podium at the National Mod UN conference in front of a couple hundred students and faculty, several hundred students and faculty, by my dear friend and colleague Galina Protsik, who's professor at Ukrainian Catholic University. She was right. You were right. I was wrong, Galina. Every time I see her now, the Russian people support this. They support the genocide in Ukraine. They support the war. There's no other possible explanation at this point because it is 3 years since I've been saying there isn't a Russian citizen who is not aware that their young men are being butchered in Ukraine for no reason and with no success
So
militarily.
so they do understand that there's no reason and no success, because I know there's a lot of propaganda coming out of Putin in terms of fighting the fascists and the necessity of the war. It's not just that you believe that it's not just that they're being taken in by the propaganda, but that they actually know what's going on and still support it.
Okay, look, as strong as Putin's censorship and propaganda are, as extensive as his rule by fear may be, and it is rule by fear,
Hmm.
he's a brutal, violent, murderous dictator responsible for the murders of many of my friends. Neither of those is anything like the extensive censorship under the Soviets, the all encompassing, mind numbing propaganda of the Soviet Communist Party machine, or of the rule by fear that dates back really to before Stalin, but really the great terror and purges under Stalin. And yet, in the face of all of that, 13,000 dead and 33,000 wounded sparked a movement that brought down the communist regime. Everybody knew that Soviet soldiers were getting killed and maimed in Afghanistan for no apparent reason. Now you have 500,000 Russians dead, 1.5 million catastrophically wounded. Every single person living in that country knows that they are getting their asses kicked in this war for no apparent reason. And there isn't a peep. That's why Galina's right. That's why there is no other. Until the Russian people demonstrate by rising up that they are against this, they are for it. And I say the same thing about the American people. Until we rise up and topple fascism here, we're supporting it. So,
Yeah,
but
and
this
and
is
that's
much
it.
worse.
And the interesting thing in Russia is it's harder for vocal groups like we've had, some Americans talking very loudly,
Yeah.
and we've had the No Kings movement. Those would be much
Yes.
harder to do in Russia without
Correct.
a bigger movement than they have. So we may
Sure.
not know the underground numbers that are there, but there's no public
It's not
demonstration of it at
visible.
all.
Yeah.
Yeah. Is there a
One other. Can I give
reason?
one other statistic?
Yeah, please go ahead.
So this is from October to April. In October, so at the end of last summer, 2025, Russia was losing on average 67 soldiers per square kilometer. Now that number's up to 179 soldiers per square kilometer.
Is that just advances in drones and how they're used and what's happening, or is that other things? Do we know?
Um, we'll get to that.
Okay.
But a lot can be credited actually to their being cut off from Starlink, which has made
Right.
Ukraine's attacks. But yes, it's also because of Ukraine's advances, uh, entirely domestically produced, not because of anything the United States is doing. That's for
Right.
sure.
I want to go back for a minute to the
Yeah,
Russian population and
yeah,
just this idea, because you told us it is your bias. So I want to challenge it a little bit more. You're suggesting that until they rise up, we need to say that they're supporting it. The question, though, is there a reason why they would be supporting this? Because, as you're saying, they know that it is not a necessary war. They know about the deaths and about the casualties. Why would they be in support of it? Is it just bias?
I don't have an answer to that. Why do Americans support fascism here? Like
Yeah. Well,
somebody's benefiting. We're not doing the who benefits Russia. People are benefiting,
right.
and then
Yeah,
they're controlling the
I would
situation.
say though that there's a difference in the United States, and this is internal knowledge though, and part of it is I don't have the internal knowledge of Russia. I'm not sure anybody at this point because there's so little communications that we get. But internal knowledge in the United States, I think there's a combination of people who are in opposition to fascism and a whole bunch of people who've been propagandized and who don't get news about the fascism.
Yeah,
And then if they did, they still have a two camp mentality in the
yeah.
United States that keeps them in their camp. So I think there are psychological reasons. I think there are information reasons
There's
in the
definitely an
US.
information. There's no journalism. There's no reporting. Even social media reporting. It's very hard for Russians to get accurate information, to get outside information. But another reality is um, Putin, for 20 years before launching this attack, decimated all opposition in Russia and financing for all opposition,
Right.
murdered journalists, murdered media owners, murdered and exiled and seized assets of opposition politicians and those who sponsored them. And then at the beginning of the war, there was massive flight of Russians out of the country who opposed the war. Basically, liberal Russians have taken over places like Maldives and Phuket, Thailand, and other places like that, and or the Baltic states where they've been allowed to go, or in Europe, and some to the United States. There's been a lot of flight out of
Yeah.
Russia of
And then
those who may have
for
opposed.
those who are left since 2014, since Crimea, and I don't know how much it was there before,
Yeah,
Putin has been demonizing
mhm,
Ukrainians as fascists, and
yeah,
it has been setting up a campaign that has been going on for
yeah,
12 plus years now. That's just laying out these fascists hate us, these fascists
yeah,
want to take our stuff,
yeah.
those types of things.
Should we turn to the weapons situation? Because I find it
Let's
absolutely
turn let's turn
fascinating.
to the weapons
It,
situation.
it
What's
really
happening?
fascinates me.
Please, let's
Uh,
do it.
Ukraine is, to say Ukraine is the world leader in military drone technology today, i- it's not too far off to say that Ukraine is the only manufacturer of effective military drone technology today. That is not an exaggeration.
Yeah.
Entirely domestically engineered, entirely domestically produced. It is absolutely incredible. And the superiority of their weapons is being demonstrated by the inferiority of ours in the Iran war.
Right. Now I
Iran
know
is
I know they've
launching
been. Go ahead.
Iran is launching the same drones at U.S. bases and targets around the Middle East of those our erstwhile allies around the Gulf. The same ones that Russia has sends hundreds of at
Right.
Ukraine every
Yeah,
day.
because Russia's been getting a lot of drones from
Right.
Iran before the Iran war started.
We can't even shoot those down with our anti-ballistic missiles, which the opportunity cost is absurd because you're talking about maybe a $2,000 drone being attacked with a $2 million missile.
Yep.
That's what Ukraine had to do at the beginning of the war. They were wasting those Patriot interceptors. And as fast as possible, they developed anti drone drones.
Right.
And the West lacks them. And at a recent NATO training in Finland, NATO discovered that a few Ukrainian drones were more effective than hundreds of NATO's.
Interesting.
And Ukraine's going to hold that, they're going to lord that over NATO
So
and the United States until we
do you
pony up.
know the numbers? Because I know that it ramped up insanely fast in the past couple of years in terms of going from garage production and into the millions. Do you know what the current numbers
Funny
are?
you should ask that because that was my next point.
Excellent.
Nice segue. In 2025, Ukraine produced 4 million drones, of all types together. Nobody knows how many of those were anti drone drones, how many were air, how many were land, how many were sea based. But it was 4 million. In 2026, it's already been announced they're going to exceed their goal of 8 million. So, pretty impressive.
Yeah,
And
it
let me
is.
say it again, every single one of those drones they're producing is the most technologically advanced military drone in the world
And incredibly cheap.
and incredibly cheap. Like under a couple $1,000s each.
Right. Yeah,
Yeah.
I heard a couple weeks ago, are they starting to get more advanced long range drones that
Funny you
either hit
should
Russian
ask.
bases or city? Excellent. I'm
Well,
asking all the right questions.
so
We actually did not rehearse this, people.
this is all spurred by Russia's deal with Iran. I want to say it was late 2023, early 2024. So a couple of years into the war, when suddenly Russia had tens of thousands of Shahed
Right.
drones from
Yeah,
Iran.
that and that was one of the most ironic times to me in the
Ha! See what you
war.
did there.
Russia started
Ironic.
getting drones from Iran and artillery shells from North Korea. That
Correct. You don't hear so much about the artillery shells from North Korea anymore.
didn't they
They're
run
not
out?
doing much damage.
Yeah,
The Shaheeds do damage just by trying to overwhelm Ukraine's
right.
radar and air defense
Yeah, the Shaheeds are the
capability.
drones, by the way, to just to
Yeah.
make sure that's clear.
So Ukraine has turned to the drone technology uh, in part to substitute for their arms and personnel disadvantage relative to Russia, uh, but also for efficiency's sake. It doesn't make sense to shoot down $1,000 drone with $1 million missile,
Right.
especially when Russia also has cruise missiles. So Ukraine had they saw the writing on the wall with American politics and also with just supply lines. It takes a long time to produce those Patriot interceptors.
Yep.
They were running out, and they wanted to save them to shoot down uh, Russian cruise missiles,
Right.
which do carry much bigger bombs and do much more damage,
Yeah, and are hitting Kyiv and major cities.
and are hitting major. Yeah, and yeah. Um, okay, so in recent months, uh, Zelensky's a language genius. So when the United States started its illegal, unprovoked war of aggression against Iran, the price of a barrel of oil went up and the price of gas went up. And Trump lifted the sanctions against Russia on the export of oil and gas. Ukraine is now developed medium and long range drone capability to impose what Zelensky has labeled long range sanctions against Russia.
Excellent.
And they are targeting those things that the rest of the world has said should be sanctioned Russia's ability to export fossil fuels,
No, very
oil
interesting.
and gas. Uh,
How
and you,
successful has this been?
Funny you should ask. Since February, Ukraine has destroyed 40% of Russia's oil production capacity. That's a
Wow.
combination of oil extraction, oil and gas extraction, refining, and ports for shipping and ships themselves and storage areas. 40% of its
That's
capacity.
incredible. I'm sorry, that's since February?
Yeah.
Wow.
There what is
So hang on a second here.
yeah.
They've destroyed 40% since February. Are they just going to destroy in the next few months Russia's energy infrastructure?
That's what they want to do. If the US is going to let them make money, they're going to just try to destroy their capacity to make money. And
Yeah.
that's why Russia's increasingly panicked and launching more missiles
Right.
at civilian
Okay.
targets.
And that's something that I have not read at all in any news sources.
If you follow Ukraine Inform on social media or Euromaidan or Roman Sheremetyev is another guy. He's a professor at Carnegie. No, Case Western. He's an economist, but Ukrainian. He has great sources.
Okay.
You could see YouTube videos every single day of oil gas facilities being blown up by Ukrainian drones.
Interesting.
Um, Ukraine's and I've said this from the beginning of the war, while Russia attacks schools and markets and hospitals and children and apartment buildings, Ukraine targets strategic sites only. That doesn't mean they don't sometimes hit civilian, um, not targets, civilian sites. That's just because sometimes things go haywire with
Right.
technology. They're targeting, excuse me, is exclusively strategic sites in addition to the energy facilities we're talking about, weapons depots, drone factories, because Russia is now producing its own
Yep.
technologically more advanced version of the Shaheeds, storage facilities, ammo, barracks, things like that. And then also bridges, roads, the that land bridge that Russia's been trying to develop to connect Russia to Crimea is now basically a land hell. Ukraine rains terror from the sky on anything that
Right.
moves along those roads.
Yeah.
Um, now,
I've got a question. Hang on one second. Hold your spot there. But I have a question. You mentioned Ukrainians destroying Russian drone facilities. Why aren't the Russians able to destroy more Ukrainian drone facilities? Originally, we just heard it's grandmothers and garages. Hasn't it expanded past that?
Ukraine shoots them down.
Oh, okay.
They try them. And
Okay.
also, the locations are pretty secret. And I don't know how mobile it is, but I would imagine those production facilities are pretty mobile. I would imagine some of them are underground. Maybe they're using, underground, subway
Sure.
areas. I don't know. I know Russia has announced that they were going to target them.
Right.
That is evidence that Russia has been targeting them and failing because
Right.
Russia does not announce anything that it targets
Yeah.
ever.
Yeah.
Um, Just yesterday, Ukrainian general announced that Ukraine's about to unleash a logistics lockdown, basically using swarms of drones, hundreds, to disrupt operations in the rear, meaning going after supply lines. The goal is to deprive Russia of assault capabilities,
Mhm.
command posts. They always go after radar facilities, air defense facilities that Russia has. They've increased the destruction by about a factor of 4 since the beginning of the year, particularly of warehouse facilities that arm and supply
Mhm.
soldiers at the front.
Yeah, and it was interesting. I'm not sure how much of this applies here. One of the just side stories Rima was telling me when she was in town is the Russians have developed, and I think the Ukrainians have developed too, drones whose purpose is to rip off the anti-drone netting
Correct.
that has been put up on tanks and on buildings and things like that, and actually send in two waves because at first you just put up a net and the drone gets caught in the net before it explodes and can't get to where it's going to go. But now they're ripping off those things.
Yeah. Um, Remind me when I start talking about Russia to talk about Russia's advances on the Shaheeds.
Okay.
Um, okay. What else do I want to talk about here? Oh, Ukraine is. Russia values Crimea as a warm water port. That's why they
Right.
originally seized it for their Black Sea fleet. Russia has almost entirely abandoned the Black Sea. This is more than a year ago because of the success of Ukraine's attacks with its sea drones and some of the cruise missiles, the short range ones that they received under the Biden administration. Ukraine attacked those ships first because they were using those to launch cruise missiles at
Right.
Ukraine, and by depriving them of the Black Sea Fleet, and they also destroyed, um, the bases, naval bases along the Black Sea
Has Russia
um,
set up
to get
new
them out.
naval bases that are out of
Not there.
range? Or,
Mm-mm.
so
No,
what are they? Where are they taking those
there
ships?
is no outer range. Uh, they've just withdrawn to the Azov. They've withdrawn their ships.
Okay.
Uh, these are just reports, but there are reports that Ukraine is on the verge of unleashing, is that the word? Demonstrating its capacity to successfully produce and deploy their own intermediate range cruise missiles. Again, the urgency because of um, the January 2025 withdrawal of the US from
Right.
supporting Ukraine. And they are currently seeking quote unquote permission. I don't know why they need that. You would think they could reverse engineer their own Patriot interceptors, but I think what they want are the real ones, not fake ones, and they want the plans for how to build them.
Right.
And you can be sure they are holding out their drone technology until they get
Yeah.
that kind of
And that's
reverse.
why they seek permission, by the way, is for allies that create our recreate our stuff. It's cooperation in the technology. So
But if they don't get it from us, they can get the designs from the French, from the Swedes, from the British for anti ballistic missile interceptors that can be retrofitted to Patriot launchers. That
sure.
it's the technology inside the rockets, not the diameter of the rockets
Right.
themselves to launch from those
Yep.
launchers. So they will have them. How long it will take to produce them, it takes a long time.
Right. Yeah.
There's
And,
the
and we're, and
Ukrainian
we're
weapons.
talking, a couple hundred missiles a year in the U.S. and Europe when
Yeah.
coming out of a factory. So it's an enormously long
But
time
then
for a
again,
small number of
Ukraine's
missiles.
urgency is much greater. So
True.
who knows?
Yep, very true.
And they've outperformed on everything from the beginning of this war. So there's every reason to believe they could outperform in that as well. So let's get to Russia.
Now, I want to get to European supply. You want to do that after doing Russia?
Be sure.
Okay.
Russia's Shaheeds have proven virtually useless against Ukraine's anti-drone drones, um, although they work fine against the United States, as I mentioned before. Uh, a few weeks ago, Ukraine discovered that Russia had developed new um, technology that it was fitting on the back of its Shaheeds to jam GPS guidance of Ukraine's drones.
Hmm.
The way Ukraine discovered this was Russia's new advanced technology doesn't work.
Oh, jeez.
And so Ukraine didn't have to adapt anything to be able to defeat those jammers,
Uh-huh.
and they're still shooting them down at the same rate. So that's
Okay.
fun. That's an expense that Russia has used. And by the way, many of the components for the jamming technology and the guidance therein came from Trump's buddies when he lifted sanctions on the export of electronic components by American manufacturers
All right.
to Russia. That went largely unreported uh, by our friends at CBS and elsewhere. Um, so Russia's back to using missile attacks against cities in Ukraine, but those cruise missiles are not an unlimited supply for Russia. If it were, they would have been using them all along.
Right.
Um, and Russia's tactics have not changed at all. They are attacking markets, apartments, hospitals on a daily basis. We're talking dozens of war crimes on a daily basis.
Yeah, and I
Kiev
was
has
about
been
to
under
say,
barrage repeatedly over the last several weeks.
we've talked about this in previous episodes. All of these Russian attacks on civilians are war crimes. There are some questions on the Ukrainians in terms of war crimes. So, one of the issues would be, for instance, oil and natural gas infrastructure. How much of it is directly related to the war effort, and how much of it are they doing because it's funding the war effort? That's one of those questionable
But unlike
territories.
Russia, which attacks Ukraine's energy infrastructure, meaning its capacity to deliver electricity
Right,
and gas to homes and businesses,
right.
Ukraine has never attacked Russia's civilian
Yeah,
energy
power plants,
infrastructure.
etc. No, absolutely. No,
Never.
the Russian war crimes are blatant. There's no question at all.
And Ukraine is most of those attacks are on facilities that are geared towards the export, and Russia's priority is to export its oil and gas. So
Yep.
much of their electricity comes from nuclear around Russia.
Okay.
So that's also important to note. Um, Sanctions, though, are critical to keeping Russia's missile supplies limited. The Europeans continue to try to enforce sanctions, but without the U.S. enforcing them, um, that's hopeless. Which is why Ukraine is going after those facilities.
Right. And it's not that they're shipping in missiles; it's that they're shipping in the technology, the parts, etc. for missiles.
Correct. Um, like I said, there are virtually no more Russian attacks from sea, and really even from land. Um, Learned this from Rima, but there's very little close quarter combat anymore between Ukrainians and Russians. It's almost all by drones, and Ukraine
Right.
has the superiority, which is why the analysts are predicting maybe Ukraine will have some kind of surge that
Right.
could change Russia's calculus.
At the
But a
front,
big
it sounds like the Russian drones are still freaky scary to the point that you don't move in daylight
This
when
is
you're at the
true.
front. Yeah.
But what is different is Russian bases are more vulnerable now because of their loss of Starlink access.
Right.
So they can't track when Ukraine launches weapons at them. And so Russia in the occupied areas is incredibly vulnerable. When they launch drones, Ukraine sees where they're coming from. And when they launch missiles, and they're able to go after them, and Russia can't see them going after them.
Right.
So I have less to say about Russia's weapon situation. Their tactics and the situation really hasn't changed. They try to overwhelm with numbers of inferior drones, and inferior in terms of they don't give a shit what they hit as long as they
Right.
hit something.
Right. No, absolutely. And they have, it's not quite human wave attacks, but they're throwing human beings at the
Yeah.
front.
You wanted to ask about Europe. What do you want to know
Yeah,
about?
so Europe, so we know the US has basically cut supplies. Europe has increased their military budgets. Europe has talked about shipping additional materials. I know just yesterday Zelensky was in Sweden and they agreed to purchase some advanced Swedish planes equivalent to F 16s. But the first ones will be delivered in January, and then a bunch will be delivered over the year after that. How much has Europe stepped up, and how much is that impacting or affecting the conflict?
The last I read, the Netherlands had provided 4 F-16s. Greece sent a bunch that couldn't fly. Sweden promised its Griffins, the old ones. A grand total of 0 have been delivered. I know France did deliver. I forget what their fighter planes are called.
Mirage.
The Mirage. Thank you.
Yeah.
I know something like 36 were promised. The last I saw, 10 had been delivered. Uh, it is beyond slow. I don't understand why so slow. It has nothing to do. Ukrainian pilots can fly all those planes.
Mhm.
Ukraine can service those planes. A lot of what was promised were planes that had been um, warehoused. They hadn't flown for a long time, so they needed to be serviced before they could be delivered.
Right.
But we're talking a year and a half, 2 years since some of those promises. of dozens of planes, particularly from Sweden, and only 4 delivered. Um, I had not been able. All I've been able to see is what's happened. Um, there's no consistent reporting on why.
Okay.
Um, I really don't know. There's some
And then
problems, I guess, in retrofitting. I don't know.
what about on the other side, ground-based stuff, including anti-air? So, anti-air missiles,
Artillery.
ground materials, supplies, things like that.
So as we know, the majority of that has come from the United States, uh, and then the NATO alliance made a deal, quote unquote, with Trump, with the United States, that they would buy what we would otherwise have provided to Ukraine. So
Right,
they would pay the United States for to send the artillery and weaponry to Ukraine. I'm aware of only one delivery under that program, and it was underwhelming in terms of diversity of ammunition and amount.
right.
Europe is sending Ukraine. They just approved a package after Orban was defeated, and I think his name is Magyar took over as
Yep.
prime minister. Something like
And
60.
just so people know that Orban was the single veto
He was
impediment
vetoing, yeah,
in the European Union to
which
supporting
operates by
Ukraine. So
consensus on its budget
yeah,
issues,
that was a giant
military.
factor when Orban lost that election.
So something like 80 billion euros, 60 billion of which was supposed to be for military. That's money going to Ukraine. Ukraine, like, if they can't purchase the weapons, the money, like, they need the shells.
Right,
Germany is trying to ramp up production to send them. Let us be clear, the United States cessation of support of weaponry to Ukraine has spurred France and the UK to ramp up production
right.
of armaments.
Mhm.
Fine. And Germany to
Yep,
ramp up production of armaments. Germany did not want to dramatically expand its defense industry. They're doing so for Ukraine. They're doing so for European security because the United States is no longer. The EU cannot afford to consider the United States to be a military ally, even though technically we still
right.
are. They cannot afford to because they see us allying with Russia. So Europe is moving rapidly towards providing its own security. The EU is already talking about creating its own security organization that would basically mean the end of NATO.
I want to be really clear here, by the way, because Americans don't understand one piece of this at all. It's only been 80 years since World War II.
That's all.
And that's a European perspective on it. And
Yep.
that includes people inside of Germany, by the
Correct.
way, who are worried about what happens if something goes wrong with the German elections and far right and things like that. But Germany had caps on what they could produce. Germany's limited in where they can send troops and what they can do. And there's always been with the alliance, with the NATO alliance, that's always been there. But the idea of Germany increasing their arms production is a by itself a gigantic political issue inside Germany and especially in other places in Europe that have been invaded by Germany only 80 years ago. We don't think in those terms in the US, but that's a very important European
Well,
perspective.
and at the same time, 40% of the American public thinks fascism is cute, and 20% can't be bothered to rise up against it. Across Europe, 90% are terrified
Right,
by what's happening in the United States of America for what it means for Europe and the far
right.
right movements in Europe, and they don't want it. And so, while it is a political issue, the overwhelming majority of Germans support, given what they don't want it to be, but they can't change American politics, so
Right,
they have to adjust.
exactly.
And so that it is important. Um, and I do think the problem is it's going to take time, and Ukraine is waiting, and the promises of deliveries are good, but they're not expecting anything in 2026 really
Yeah.
on
Well,
any of those.
the last time we talked, Germany had basically emptied out their storage and building new factories that were going to take a year to put up the factory before they can start
Yeah.
cranking out more artillery
Yeah.
shells. So it's absolutely incredible. We think that this stuff happens quickly because it happens quickly in movies, and it takes months and
Right.
years to crank these
Right.
things out. And then I was also going to add, now with the anti-missiles and with the Patriots and Patriots in particular and others, the war in Iran has taken up the rest of the US
Funny you
stockpile,
should mention that.
and the US doesn't have enough anti-missiles for that war and to protect our allies in Iran from the war we
Correct.
started.
Oh, and we moved our Patriot batteries from South Korea to the Middle East
Yep.
in advance of this Iran war. So South Korea is vulnerable. There's no reporting in the U.S. on that. Um, but let's get back to this because it does affect Russia's internal situation. Russia's economy was teetering on the verge of total collapse. Trump gifted Putin the Iran war.
Hmm.
Oil prices more than doubled, and the U.S. lifted sanctions on Russian oil exports. Russia has earned $20 billion extra just in the last 2 months.
Yeah, it's incredible.
And this is an enormous midterm danger for Ukraine. That is why Ukraine has escalated its long range sanctions
Right.
and this the logistical long range logistical war that I mentioned before. They need to capitalize now, and they know it.
Right.
While Russia's losses are mounting, and before they can use that income to produce any kind of medium or long range weapons,
Yep.
yeah. So
So do you know how much they've cut into Russian income? You mentioned, but they've destroyed about 40% of the various infrastructure. How much have they cut into their oil income or oil and gas income?
but the thing is, because of the increase in prices, oil that they've exported stuff that had already been barreled and ready to
Right.
export. So
Okay.
they've had an increase of $20 billion. That's why Ukraine is blitzing Russia's
Right. Exactly.
oil export and oil production, because they're trying to stop
And it
that,
would
and
have
they
been
need
an
to
even
stop it.
higher increase had Ukraine not done that. Yeah.
This is correct.
Okay.
Yep. Yeah. Yeah. It would have been about 40 billion by this point. They
Right.
cut it in half. Yeah.
Yep.
Um, yeah.
All right. Hey, we're coming up on an hour. Do you have any final thoughts? Any things you wanted to talk about you haven't covered?
So, just that, what are these expectations of possible Ukrainian advance over the summer?
Yeah.
It's not going to be territorial on the battlefield. Likely, it will be if their medium range missiles hit and really destroy oil fields and refineries, because they're shutting down with these drone attacks, but Russia's putting out the fires and rebuilding. That's
Right.
diverting their attention, but Ukraine wants to destroy, not
Right.
put out a commission. Um, so that is a high priority. If they can do that, then their hope is that that will change the political calculations inside Russia and maybe destabilize
Right.
the regime.
Okay.
But it's not going to be taking over territory on the
Okay.
battlefield.
It's a
Nobody's
different
expecting it.
it's a different kind of war, absolutely.
It is a different kind of war.
All right. So I'll give you the impossible question. How much longer is this going to last?
That's what Joan always says.
Good gulp.
Yeah, yeah, good goal. I wonder when they do develop the missiles, if there's going to be a point where they launch one randomly targeted somewhere in a city. They're not, because they're worried about the reciprocal damage. But if they get intelligence that, particularly if they can get their own anti-ballistic missile replacement for the Patriot interceptors,
Mhm.
where and if they think they've destroyed, or Russia's cruise missile supply has been whittled down enough, I wonder if the temptation to do that with a propaganda blitzkrieg, with videos of this is what you've done to Kiev every day, we can
Right.
do this. I wonder if that will. I hope it doesn't, because
I
they
wonder
do
if
have
it's
high ground by not doing that.
I
But
wonder if just a swarm attack against a lot of different military and infrastructure facilities, military infrastructure might do it
well,
too,
that's what they've been doing to
with the threat
overwhelm
of another
Russia's
one. Yeah.
interior air defenses. Yeah,
Right.
that's how they
Yeah.
get.
And,
Yeah,
and
they're launching
overwhelming.
hundreds of drones, and 5 get through,
Right.
but they can afford it because those drones are so cheap.
Yeah. No, exactly.
Yeah.
And Russians are
Yep.
spending so much money to shoot them down. Um,
Correct.
Patriot missiles, just real quick as a final thing. Do you know any due dates on when they could be getting more? Is there anything out there on resupply of those?
Patriot
All right,
interceptors.
the replacements for anti-air missiles of any type.
They're going to have to produce their own,
Okay,
um, because and especially now that the United States has depleted our Patriot interceptor supply, there's no way that the other NATO countries are going to feel good about sending their own versions of anti-ballistic missiles
right,
because our air defenses aren't there to supplement those.
right.
So
No, absolutely. All right. Well, that's the not very good news across the board, but there are some
wah,
very
wah.
interesting developments. I think one of the things I'm seeing here is Russia's mistake has compounded many times over the years in the initial invasion. It didn't go the way they expected it to, and Ukraine has bounced back faster than pretty much anybody on the planet expected them to in terms of developing drone technology and the way the Ukrainian people came together. So hopefully we're in a position where they can hold out until some of these other possibilities come through.
Can I make one pitch that I know you will support?
Please.
Um, our friend Rima Ziritis, who's a combat medic and trains combat medics at the Ukrainian front, um, the medics across Ukraine rely upon external supplies of advanced and basic medical equipment, from tourniquets to bandages to packing for internal wounds. And the items that are needed are quite specific and can be quite expensive. One thing they have needed for the last year is a replacement for an emergency evacuation vehicle, a, a military grade ambulance. And they got an $8,000 matching proposal. So if they can raise $8,000, they get the match of 8,000, which will put them over the amount that they need to get that vehicle. You can make a tax deductible donation by going to a URL that I created, tinyurl.com, tinyurl.com / UAUSA -donate. Maybe we can put that on a
We
slide
will
at
put
the
that on
end
the
of this
screen while you're
podcast.
reading this. Absolutely. Yeah, and this is incredibly important, folks. Please donate what you can, and if any of you have deep enough pockets to do, the 3 or 4 digits, that would be incredible.
That would be
It is
incredible.
amazing to me how these medics and frankly a lot of other people in the war zone have to provide their own things, and they are doing it. If you want to help support the war effort, this is a very direct way to do it.
And it is truly heroic, and it is saving Ukrainian lives every single day. Every dollar donated does. So
On that
thank
note, thank you all for joining us once again. We'll go back to another episode of Who Benefits next week. And then in a week or two, I think we might update on Gaza because we haven't talked about that one for a
you.
while.
Yeah.
Thank you, David, for producing. And we will see you all very soon.
Bye.